Single dad veteran refused reward for finding $50K. The money was bait to find him. He thought he was just doing the right thing, until the money he returned turned out to be a trap to find the father who abandoned him and the truth that could break his heart or set him free. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn chill nipped at Eli Turner's face as he stepped onto his front porch before sunrise. The wooden boards creaked beneath his feet, another reminder of all the repairs he couldn't afford. Inside, the coffee maker sputtered to life, filling the small kitchen with its familiar aroma. Eli rubbed his lower back, an old habit from where shrapnel had left its mark years ago. The pain was always worse in the cold months. He glanced at the stack of bills on the counter, their red final notice stamps seeming to glow in the dim morning light. "Dad, have you seen my sheet music?" Maddie's voice carried down the narrow hallway. The sound of drawers opening and closing followed her words. "Check the piano bench," he called back, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, one for him and hot chocolate for Maddie. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, already dressed for school. At 15, she looked more like her mother every day. "Found it," she said, waving the worn pages. Her eyes drifted to the foreclosure notice, stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a music note, a remnant from happier times. She tried to hide her worry, but Eli saw it in the slight furrow of her brow. "Breakfast?" he asked, sliding a plate of toast across the counter. "Thanks, Dad." She sat down, carefully arranging her sheet music beside her plate. "Are you sure you can still get me to piano today?" "I know you're working late. I promised, didn't I?" Eli managed to smile, though the logistics of fitting everything into one day made his head hurt. "I'll make it." The drive to school was quiet, their old pickup truck grumbling along the leaf-strewn streets of Willow Creek. Small-town life moved at its own pace here. People still waved from their porches, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Sometimes that was a comfort. Other times, it made Eli feel exposed, like everyone could see how close he was to losing it all. Why? "Have a good day, sweetie," he said as Maddie hopped out in front of the high school. "You too, Dad." "Don't work too hard." She gave him a quick hug before disappearing into the stream of students. The morning sun was just breaking through the clouds when Eli pulled into Jeb's auto repair. The familiar scents of motor oil and metal greeted him as he walked into the garage. Jeb Collins was already there, his broad frame bent over an engine block. "Morning," Jeb grunted, straightening up with a grimace. "Timing belt's shot on this one. Owner can't afford the repair." "Story of the month," Eli replied, pulling on his work coveralls. Jeb wiped his hands on a rag, his expression unusually serious. "Listen, Turner, I need to level with you." He gestured around the nearly empty garage. "Business ain't what it used to be. People are taking their cars to that new chain shop over in Mason City. If things don't pick up soon." The words hung heavy in the air. Eli nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. "I appreciate the heads up, Jeb." "You're the best mechanic I've got," Jeb continued, his voice gruff with emotion. "Hell, you're the best I've ever had. But I can't keep paying full hours if the work ain't here." Eli's back twinged as he bent to pick up his toolbox. "I understand. We'll figure something out." The day dragged on, with only 2 oil changes and a brake job. By late afternoon, Eli's phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. "Ready whenever you are." He looked at the clock, then at his empty wallet, knowing the night shift at the convenience store was his only shot at making rent. "Go on, Jeb," said, noticing his distraction. "We're dead here anyway." After dropping Maddie at her piano lesson, Eli drove across town to the Gas and Go. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. His back ached from a day of bending over engines, but he couldn't afford to rest. The night shift would at least put a dent in what they owed. The convenience store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he parked in the empty lot. He was early for his shift, but something caught his eye in the beam of his headlights. A manila envelope lying in the middle of the parking lot, its contents spilling onto the asphalt. Eli's heart began to pound as he stepped out of the truck. The envelope was torn, revealing stacks of crisp bills. He bent down slowly, his back protesting, and picked it up with trembling hands. Under the harsh store lights, he could see they were $100 bills, more money than he'd seen in one place since his army days. His fingers tightened around the envelope as his mind raced. This much cash could solve everything. The foreclosure, Maddie's piano lessons, the constant struggle to stay afloat. No one would know. No one would blame him. But as he stood there in the empty parking lot, the weight of the money felt heavy in more ways than one. His hands started to shake, not from excitement, but from something deeper, a battle between desperation and the core of who he was. The night wind whistled through the empty parking lot as Eli Turner crouched beside his old pickup truck, counting the stack of bills under the flickering street lamp. His weathered hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he held. $50,000. More money than he'd seen in his life. He counted again, his calloused fingers moving methodically through the crisp bills. The amount didn't change. The torn envelope felt heavy in his hands, like it was made of lead instead of paper. Sliding back into the driver's seat, Eli set the envelope on the passenger side. The truck's engine grumbled to life, its familiar rattle doing nothing to quiet his racing thoughts. Every bump in the road made the envelope shift, drawing his eyes like a magnet. The foreclosure notice on his fridge flashed through his mind. Maddie's college fund nearly empty. The medical bills from Sarah's cancer treatments that he was still paying off. This money could fix everything. But something else pulled at him too. A voice from his past, clear as day. His old commanding officer in Iraq, speaking during a dusty morning briefing. Character isn't what you do when everyone's watching. It's what you do when no one is. The drive home passed in a blur. Before he knew it, Eli was sitting at his kitchen table, the envelope placed squarely in the center, like some kind of ticking bomb. The kitchen clock read 11:42 p.m. The house was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. "Dad?" Eli looked up to find Maddie standing in the doorway, her long brown hair messy from sleep. She wore her mother's old college sweatshirt, the one that still smelled faintly of Sarah's perfume. "Hey, sweetheart. Did I wake you?" "Couldn't sleep." Maddie's eyes fixed on the envelope. "What's that?" Eli sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Found it in the gas station parking lot. It's $50,000. Maddie's eyes widened. She pulled out a chair and sat down, her gaze never leaving the envelope. "That's a lot of money." "Yeah." Eli's voice was rough. "It is. What are you going to do?" The question hit him like a physical blow, though he'd been asking himself the same thing for the past hour. Suddenly, he was back in Iraq, the desert heat pressing down on him like a weight. He could see Private Johnson, just a kid really, barely 20, holding up a gold watch they'd found while clearing a bombed-out building. "Found it in the rubble, Sarge. No way to know who it belongs to now." Eli had taken the watch, feeling its weight. It would have been worth good money back home. No one would have known. But he remembered looking at that young soldier's face, seeing the question there, the moment of moral testing. We're here to help these people rebuild. Private. Not take what's left of their lives. He'd placed the watch carefully in the battalion's recovered items box. Later that week, they'd found the owner, an old man who'd lost everything else in the bombing. The way he'd clutched that watch to his chest, tears streaming down his weathered face, had taught Eli more about doing right than any sermon ever could. "I'm taking it to Sheriff Daniels first thing in the morning," Eli said, coming back to the present. "Someone's probably looking for it." Maddie nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I knew you would." "Yeah?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "You always do the right thing, Dad, even when it's hard." She stood up and kissed his cheek. "That's why Mom loved you so much." The words caught him off guard, making his throat tight. "Get some sleep, kiddo. School tomorrow." Morning came too quickly. Eli hadn't slept much, but his resolve was firm as he walked into the sheriff's office, the envelope tucked inside his jacket. The front desk deputy looked up, surprised to see him so early. "Need to see Sheriff Daniels," Eli said quietly. "It's important." Sheriff Hank Daniels was an old-school lawman, Vietnam era, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He'd known Eli since he'd moved back to town after Sarah's death. "What brings you in so early, Turner?" Eli placed the envelope on the desk. "Found this last night at Mason's gas station. Figured someone might be missing it." Daniels opened the envelope, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline as he counted. 50,000. Where exactly did you find this? Parking lot. Around 10:30 last night. The sheriff studied him for a long moment. You know, finder's fee is customary in cases like this. 10% is last. Standard. No. Eli's voice was firm. Just want to turn it in. You sure about that? $5,000 could help with. I'm sure. Eli stood straighter, his jaw set. Just need to sign whatever statement you need. Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly, respect evident in his eyes. He pulled out a form, and Eli signed where indicated, explicitly refusing any reward. As he turned to leave, a flash went off, making him blink. Jenny Parker from the local paper stood in the doorway, camera in hand. "Mr. Turner, is it true you just turned in $50,000? Eli's face darkened. He pushed past her without a word, his boots echoing on the linoleum floor. The last thing he wanted was attention. He'd done what needed doing, nothing more. What he needed now was a cup of coffee and some peace before his shift at the garage. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Jeb's Auto Repair as Eli Turner lay on his back beneath a rusted Ford F-150. His weathered hands worked methodically at the transmission, each movement precise despite the constant ache in his lower back. The radio played softly in the background, country music mixing with the metallic clinks of his tools. "Hey, Turner!" Mike, his younger coworker, called out from across the garage. "You're famous!" Eli slid out from under the truck, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "What are you talking about?" Mike held up the local newspaper, the Willow Creek Gazette, grinning widely. There on the front page was a photo of Eli leaving the sheriff's office, his face turned away from the camera. The headline read in bold letters, "Veteran returns, $50,000. Refuses reward." "Didn't know we had a celebrity mechanic," Mike teased, tossing the paper onto Eli's workbench. Eli's jaw tightened. "It's nothing special. Anyone would have done the same." "No way, man. 50 grand? That's life-changing money right there." Throughout the afternoon, customers pointed at the article, offering praise and patting him on the back. Mrs. Henderson, picking up her minivan, insisted on giving him a fresh apple pie. Mr. Roberts, dropping off his truck, shook his hand 3 times, calling him a credit to the community. Each compliment made Eli's shoulders tense further. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to fix engines and take care of his daughter. By closing time, Eli's neck ached from nodding at well-wishers. He drove home in his old pickup, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The newspaper lay crumpled on the passenger seat, that unwanted photo staring up at him. Inside their small rental house, Maddie had already set the table for dinner. The smell of heated leftovers filled the kitchen. Yesterday's meatloaf and microwaved vegetables. His daughter's textbooks were spread across one end of the table, math homework half finished. "I saw the newspaper," Maddie said, serving herself some green beans. "My friends at school were talking about it." Eli sighed, cutting into his meatloaf. "People are making too big a deal of it." "Dad, it was the right thing to do." Maddie's voice carried the same gentle tone her mother used to have. "You should be proud. I'm just tired of—" A knock at the front door interrupted him. Father and daughter exchanged glances. They rarely got visitors, especially after dark. Eli pushed back his chair and walked to the door, his combat-trained instincts making him pause before opening it. A woman stood on the porch, illuminated by the yellow porch light. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, wearing a tailored navy blazer and carrying a leather briefcase. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes held a warmth that seemed genuine. "Mr. Turner?" Her voice was steady, professional. "I'm Clara Jameson. May I come in?" "It's about the money you found." Eli hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. Maddie appeared in the hallway, curious but hanging back. "This is my daughter, Maddie," Eli said, gesturing to the kitchen. "We were just having dinner. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you," Clara replied, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. She placed her briefcase beside her feet. "I won't take much of your time. I'm here about the $50,000 you turned in to Sheriff Daniels." Eli's expression remained neutral. "You're saying it's yours?" Clara nodded, reaching into her briefcase. "I have all the necessary documentation here. The serial numbers match, and the sheriff has verified everything." She pulled out a manila envelope. "I want to offer you a reward, 20% of the amount. It's the least I can do." "No." Eli's response was immediate and firm. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I don't want a reward." "Mr. Turner, please." Clara leaned forward, her eyes sincere. $10,000 could make a real difference. "I understand you're a single father. What I am is someone who did what anyone should do." Eli interrupted, his voice remaining respectful but unyielding. "I don't need payment for basic decency." Maddie watched the exchange silently, her homework forgotten. Clara's eyes moved between father and daughter, noting their worn but clean clothes, the carefully maintained but outdated appliances in the kitchen, the stack of bills partially visible under a magnet on the refrigerator. "Sometimes," Clara said softly, "accepting help isn't a weakness, Mr. Turner. It's an act of trust." "Maybe so," Eli replied, standing up. "But this isn't about trust. It's about doing what's right. Because it's right. Nothing more." Clara studied him for a long moment, then slowly packed her documents back into her briefcase. She rose, smoothing her blazer, and Eli walked her to the door. At the threshold, she turned back, her hand resting on the doorframe. The porch light cast shadows across her face as she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You really have no idea who I am, do you?" she said, softly, then turned and walked into the darkness, leaving Eli standing in the doorway, puzzled by her words. Morning sunlight painted long shadows across Highway 12 as Eli's old pickup rumbled toward Jeb's auto repair. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, Clara Jameson's cryptic words from the night before still echoing in his mind. "You really have no idea who I am, do you?" The question had kept him tossing and turning most of the night. Something about her manner, the way she carried herself. It spoke of purpose beyond just claiming lost money. The familiar scent of motor oil and grease welcomed him as he pulled into the shop's parking lot. Mike, his fellow mechanic, was already raising the garage door, the metal rattling along its track. "Morning," Eli called out, grabbing his toolbox from the truck bed. "Hey, local celebrity," Mike grinned, waving yesterday's newspaper. "Your face is still making headlines." Eli shook his head, ducking under the hood of a Chevy that needed work. He'd barely started checking the timing belt when he heard the distinct crunch of tires on gravel. Looking up, he saw a sleek silver sedan pulling into the lot. Clara Jameson stepped out, looking professional in a navy blazer and carrying a leather portfolio. Her presence seemed oddly out of place among the oil stains and rusty tools. "Mr. Turner," she smiled warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Eli wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Ma'am, if this is about the reward again." "Actually," she interjected softly, "I was hoping we could talk over lunch. There's something important I need to explain." Mike shot Eli a curious look from across the garage. Eli hesitated, studying Clara's face. There was something earnest in her expression that made him pause. "I don't usually take lunch breaks," he said. "Please," she pressed. 1 hour of your time. The Golden Diner. My treat. I promise it'll be worth your while." After a moment's consideration, Eli nodded to Jeb, who was watching from the office doorway. His boss waved him off with understanding. 20 minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner booth at the Golden Diner, a local institution known for its home-style cooking and checkerboard floors. The waitress had just set down their coffee when Clara opened her portfolio. "First," she began, "I need to apologize for the deception." She met his eyes directly. "I didn't lose that money, Mr. Turner. I placed it there deliberately." Eli's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "Excuse me?" Clara pulled out several newspaper clippings, spreading them carefully on the table. I represent the Turner Hayes Foundation for Veteran Support. We've been conducting what we call integrity tests in various towns across the South. Eli scanned the headlines. Mystery money leads to community center. Good Samaritan, rewarded with Veterans Program. His confusion deepened with each one. We place substantial amounts of cash in locations where they're likely to be found, Clara explained. Then we wait to see who finds it and, more importantly, what they do with it. So it was all a trick? Eli's voice held a sharp edge. Some kind of social experiment? Clara shook her head. Not a trick, a search. We're looking for people of exceptional character to help us establish new veteran support centers. People like you, Mr. Turner. She pulled out more documents, photographs of community centers, medical facilities, housing developments. Our foundation builds and funds programs for veterans and their families. But we need local leaders we can trust, people who've proven their integrity when tested. Eli sat back, his mind spinning. Why all the secrecy? Why not just interview people? Character reveals itself in unguarded moments, Clara said softly. When someone thinks no one is watching, that's when you see their true nature. She paused. You didn't just return the money, Mr. Turner. You refused any reward, even knowing about your now financial struggles. Eli shifted uncomfortably. How do you know about? We do thorough research, she acknowledged. Former Army sergeant, mechanic, single father. 2 tours in Iraq, Purple Heart recipient. Her voice softened. Widowed 3 years ago. Behind on mortgage payments. That's private information, Eli said stiffly. It is, Clara agreed. And I apologize for the invasion of privacy. But we needed to understand who you are. She leaned forward. Would you be willing to visit our headquarters in Ashbury? See what we're trying to build? Eli studied the documents spread before him, his thoughts churning. Part of him wanted to walk away from this strange proposition. But another part, the part that remembered fellow soldiers who'd come home broken and found no help, made him hesitate. I'll think about it, he said finally. That evening, after dinner, Eli sat with Maddie on their small front porch. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as he told her about Clara's revelation and offer. Maddie listened intently, her eyes brightening with each detail. When he finished, she smiled that knowing smile she'd inherited from her mother, the one that always made him feel like she could see right through him. Maybe God's testing you, Daddy, she teased, bumping his shoulder with hers. Eli managed a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The weight of the decision pressed heavy on his shoulders as cricket songs filled the evening air. The autumn morning stretched crisp and clear across the Georgia countryside as Eli's weathered pickup truck wound its way through the rolling hills toward Ashbury. Golden maple leaves drifted across the windshield like confetti, and the October air carried the earthy scent of harvest through his half-open window. Beside him, Maddie fiddled with the radio dial, cycling through static and fragments of songs before settling on an old country station where George Strait's voice filled the cab with familiar comfort. Her presence had a calming effect on his nerves about this mysterious meeting, though he couldn't entirely shake the feeling that something much bigger than a simple job offer waited at the end of this 30-mile drive. The envelope with $50,000 had changed everything, and now this Clara Jameson woman was promising answers that might change things even more. Look, Dad, Maddie said suddenly, pointing through the passenger window to a modest, single-story brick building nestled among towering pine trees. A hand-painted wooden sign displayed a lighthouse with its beam cutting through painted storm clouds. Below it, simple black letters spelled out, "The Lighthouse Foundation, guiding families home." Eli slowed the truck and pulled into the small gravel parking lot, his mechanic's eye automatically studying the well-maintained but deliberately humble facility. No fancy chrome and glass architecture here, no marble columns or impressive fountains. Just practical, honest construction that spoke of service rather than show. The building's clean lines and fresh paint suggested an organization that spent its money on mission, not appearances. Clara Jameson stood waiting by the main entrance, her professional navy blazer and pressed slacks softened by a genuinely warm smile that reached her eyes. She looked to be in her late 40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and the kind of steady presence that immediately put people at ease. As Eli and Maddie approached, She stepped forward with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to helping others through difficult situations. "I'm so glad you both came," she said, her southern accent carrying notes of genuine pleasure as she held the glass door open wide. "Please, come in. I think you're going to be impressed by what we do here." The office interior felt more like a community center than any corporate space Eli had ever seen. The walls were lined with framed photographs, hundreds of them in various sizes, creating a patchwork tapestry of human faces and moments of joy. Veterans in wheelchairs, surrounded by smiling families at barbecues. Young soldiers in dress uniforms receiving house keys from beaming real estate agents. Children with gap-toothed grins hugging their returning parents in airport terminals. Elderly veterans teaching grandchildren to fish from wooden docks. Every single picture tells a story, Clara explained, her voice carrying the quiet pride of someone who had witnessed countless small miracles. She gestured toward the photographs as she led them down a hallway lined with more images. Each one represents a family we've helped get back on their feet, find their footing again after deployment, or simply discover hope when they thought none existed. She paused beside a particularly touching photograph of an elderly veteran in a Vietnam-era cap teaching a young boy to cast a fishing line into a sun-dappled lake. This is what we're really about. Rebuilding lives one family at a time, one relationship at a time. That gentleman there lost his son in Afghanistan, and that little boy is his neighbor's child whose father never came home. They found each other through our grief counseling program. Maddie wandered ahead, studying the photographs with the genuine interest of a teenager who still believed the world could be fixed. Her fingers traced the glass of one frame showing a young mother holding the keys to a modest home while two small children played on the front steps. Eli watched his daughter's face soften with recognition of something beautiful and meaningful, and felt a familiar surge of pride in her compassionate heart. Clara guided them into a small conference room where warm morning sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking a carefully tended garden. Outside, several elderly veterans sat at picnic tables, playing chess and checkers, their animated conversations and occasional laughter drifting through the glass. The scene reminded Eli of his grandfather's stories about old soldiers gathering at the VFW hall, finding fellowship in shared experience and understanding. "Coffee?" Clara offered, moving to pour from a thermal carafe sitting on an oak sideboard beside a plate of homemade cookies. "Mrs. Henderson from our volunteer auxiliary baked these this morning. She lost her husband in Vietnam and channels her energy into taking care of the rest of us." "Thanks," Eli said, accepting the ceramic mug with hands that remained steady despite his growing unease about where this conversation might lead. The coffee was strong and dark, the kind that suggested early mornings and serious work ahead. "You mentioned a project on the phone?" Clara nodded, settling into her chair and pulling out a thick manila folder. "We're launching a new Veterans Assistance Center right here in Willow Creek. It would provide emergency housing for families in crisis, job training programs, grief counseling, financial planning assistance, essentially everything military families need to successfully transition back to civilian life." She spread out several detailed blueprints across the conference table, the architectural drawings revealing a thoughtfully designed facility. "We need someone to run it, someone who understands both military discipline and genuine compassion. Someone the community already knows and trusts." Eli leaned forward, studying the plans with his mechanical mind, automatically noting the practical details that mattered. Wheelchair ramps leading to every entrance, family spaces designed for privacy and comfort, workshop areas equipped for job training and practical skills, children's play areas visible from counseling offices so parents could keep their kids close during difficult conversations. It was exactly the kind of place he wished had existed when he'd returned from Iraq with nothing but nightmares and an uncertain future. "Why, me?" he asked finally, looking up from the blueprints to meet Clara's steady gaze. "There must be dozens of qualified veterans in this area, with better credentials, more education, more experience with this kind of work." Clara set down her coffee cup with deliberate care, her expression growing noticeably more serious. The casual warmth in her demeanor shifted slightly, replaced by something that looked like nervous anticipation. "You're absolutely right about that. But our benefactor, he specifically wanted to find you, Eli. You, personally." The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the walls seeming to press closer despite the cheerful sunlight streaming through the windows. A cold knot formed in Eli's stomach as decades-old instincts for danger began sending warning signals through his nervous system. "What exactly do you mean, find me?" His voice carried the controlled tension of a soldier sensing an ambush. Clara's fingers moved to touch a manila envelope that had been sitting beside her folder throughout their conversation. "The money you found, Eli, it wasn't just a test of character, though it certainly served that purpose. It was specifically designed as a way to locate you. Our benefactor has been searching for years, hiring private investigators and following every lead. But you're remarkably hard to track down when you don't want to be found." Eli's jaw tightened until the muscles ached, and he felt his body automatically shifting into the defensive posture that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Iraq. "Who is this benefactor you keep talking about?" Clara hesitated, her professional composure wavering as she studied his face with what looked like genuine concern for his emotional well-being. Her fingers drummed once against the envelope before she seemed to reach some internal decision. "Before I tell you his name, please understand that he's changed dramatically over the years. Time and regret have." "Who?" Eli's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the single word carried the force of a command that expected immediate compliance. Clara took a deep breath that seemed to require considerable effort. "Colonel Raymond Turner." The name struck Eli like a physical blow to the chest, driving the air from his lungs and sending his carefully constructed world spinning off its axis. The coffee mug trembled in his hand, hot liquid spilling across his fingers and onto the conference table, but he barely registered the burn. Memories crashed through the careful defenses he'd spent 30 years building. A military father's impossible standards that no son could ever meet. Bitter arguments that escalated into shouting matches. His mother's tears falling silently during dinner while father and son glared at each other across an unbridgeable divide. He remembered the final devastating fight before his deployment to Iraq, words hurled like weapons designed to inflict maximum damage. His father's harsh judgment of his choices, his character, his worthiness to wear the uniform. His own furious response, accusations about duty and love and failure that still echoed in quiet moments when his guard was down. "My father." The words emerged from his throat like shards of broken glass, tasting like ash and old bitterness and 30 years of carefully maintained anger. "He's been trying to make amends for a very long time," Clara said gently, her voice carrying the practiced compassion of someone who had delivered difficult news to many families. "The foundation, this Veteran Center project, all the families we've helped over the years, it's all part of his attempt to what?" Eli stood abruptly, his chair scraping harsh against the polished floor with a sound that cut through the peaceful atmosphere like a gunshot. His hands shook with suppressed emotion as he reached for his jacket. "Buy back the years he threw away? Fix 30 years of damage with money and good deeds? Erase the past with charitable donations?" "Dad?" Maddie's voice carried from the doorway where she had appeared, her young face etched with concern as she took in the sudden tension radiating from her father's rigid posture. The photographs on the walls behind her seemed to mock the possibility of healing and reconciliation. Eli grabbed his worn denim jacket with movements sharp and jerky with barely controlled emotion. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to protect himself and his daughter from the manipulation he was certain lay behind this elaborate setup. "My father's been dead to me for 30 years, he said, his voice cracking slightly despite his efforts to maintain control. "Nothing's changed that. Nothing ever will." He strode past Clara's protests, past the wall of hopeful photographs documenting other families' redemption stories, past everything his father was apparently trying to build with money that couldn't purchase forgiveness or erase the damage of decades. Maddie hurried after him, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she struggled to keep up with his longer strides. She slid into the passenger seat of the pickup truck just as he started the engine with more force than necessary, the diesel motor roaring to life with a sound that seemed to echo his internal turmoil. Clara appeared in the foundation's doorway, her hand raised as if to call them back, but Eli was already backing out of the gravel parking lot with his jaw set like stone. The drive home stretched before them like a blur of autumn colors and heavy silence broken only by the soft country music still playing on the radio. Eli gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white and his fingers ached, fighting against the burning sensation behind his eyes that threatened to become something he couldn't allow his daughter to witness. The landscape outside blurred past. Golden cornfields ready for harvest, red barns weathered by generations of seasons, small farmhouses with smoke rising from their chimneys into the clear October sky. Beside him, Maddie sat quietly, occasionally reaching over to touch his arm with gentle fingers. A gesture so heartbreakingly similar to her mother's way of offering comfort that it made his throat tighten even more. She didn't ask questions or demand explanations, seeming to understand instinctively that her father needed space to process whatever bombshell had just exploded in that peaceful conference room. The miles rolled by, marked only by the gentle voices of country singers on the radio and the steady rhythm of wheels on asphalt. Everything Eli had carefully built over the years, his quiet life, his hard-won peace, his sense of control over his small corner of the world, felt suddenly fragile, shaken by the ghost of a man he'd tried so desperately hard to forget. The truck climbed the last hill toward Willow Creek, passing the familiar landmarks that usually brought him comfort. Thompson's dairy farm with its black and white Holstein cattle, the old stone church where his wife was buried, the rusty water tower that bore the town's name in faded blue letters. But today, even these symbols of home felt different, contaminated somehow by the knowledge that his father had been orchestrating events from the shadows. Eli felt his daughter's worried gaze on his profile as they crested the hill and began the descent toward their small house. He kept his eyes fixed determinedly on the road ahead, unwilling to let her see the tears he was barely managing to hold back. The past he'd buried with such deliberate care was suddenly alive again, breathing down his neck like some persistent ghost, and he had absolutely no idea how to kill it a second time. The porch boards creaked beneath Eli's rocking chair as evening settled over Willow Creek. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the small table beside him, amber liquid catching the last rays of sunlight. He hadn't touched alcohol since returning from Iraq, but today's revelation had nearly broken that resolve. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves from somewhere in the neighborhood, triggering memories he'd fought to suppress. Suddenly he was 18 again, standing ramrod straight in his father's study, chest puffed out in his new Army uniform. "You're making a mistake, son," Colonel Raymond Turner had said, his voice cold with disapproval. "I didn't spend 25 years climbing the ranks so you could start at the bottom as cannon fodder." Young Eli had kept his composure, just as the colonel had taught him. "Sir, I want to serve my country, like you did." "As an enlisted man?" The colonel's laugh had been sharp, cutting. "You're throwing away your future." "That college acceptance—" "It's my choice, sir." Eli had met his father's eyes, unflinching. "My duty." The memory shifted, blurred, became another scene months later. The study again, but this time filled with shouting. "You're no son of mine." The colonel's face had been purple with rage. "If you walk out that door, don't ever come back. I never was your son." Eli had screamed back, years of resentment boiling over. "I was your project, your legacy. Well, I choose my own path now." The screen door squeaked, pulling Eli back to the present. Maddie stepped onto the porch, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in her hands. She settled into the chair next to his, offering one of the mugs. "Want to talk about it?" she asked quietly. Eli wrapped his hands around the warm mug, letting the sweetness of the chocolate chase away the bitter taste of memories. "Not much to tell. Mom always said talking helps heal things." Maddie's voice was gentle, so much like her mother's it made his chest ache. "What happened with Grandpa?" Eli sighed, watching steam rise from his mug. "I enlisted right after high school. Your grandfather, he had different plans for me. Wanted me to go to college, become an officer like him. When I chose my own path, the words stuck in his throat. He what, Dad? He disowned me, said I was dead to him." Eli's voice roughened. "I shipped out to basic the next day. Never saw him again." "Your grandmother, she tried to keep in touch, but after she passed," he shook his head. "That was it." Maddie was quiet for a long moment. "People can change, Dad. Maybe he's different now." Before Eli could respond, Headlights swept across the yard. Clara's sedan pulled up to the curb, and she emerged carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Turner?" She approached the porch steps. "I hope I'm not interrupting. Depends what you're here for." Eli's voice was flat. Clara climbed the steps, her heels clicking against the wood. "Your father asked me to give you this." She held out the portfolio. "He wants to meet with you." "He's alive?" Despite himself, surprise cracked through Eli's neutral expression. "Yes, though." Clara hesitated. "He's not well, Eli. The doctors give him maybe 6 months. He's been trying to find you for years. To make amends." Eli stood abruptly, the rocking chair swaying behind him. Amends? 30 years of silence. And now he wants to clear his conscience? "Dad." Maddie touched his arm. "No." Eli's voice shook with anger. "First the money trick. Now this? You manipulated me. Tested me. Like some lab rat. The foundation is real." Clara interrupted firmly. "Everything I told you about the Veterans Center is true. Your father funds our work, yes, but finding you, that was personal for him. He's changed, Eli. Loss and time have a way of teaching hard lessons. Get out." Eli turned away, gripping the porch railing. "Both the Colonel and I made our choices long ago. Nothing's changed." Clara set the portfolio on the small table next to the untouched whiskey. "My card's inside. Think about it, please. If not for him, then for yourself." Her footsteps retreated down the stairs, and soon her car's engine faded into the distance. Hours later, after Maddie had gone to bed, Eli sat at the sixth kitchen table. The portfolio lay unopened before him. Finally, with trembling fingers, he unzipped it. Documents spilled out. Newspaper clippings about the Colonel's philanthropy. Photos of veteran outreach programs. Medical reports. At the bottom lay a worn photograph he hadn't seen in decades. 10-year-old Eli in his Little League uniform. The Colonel kneeling beside him with a rare smile. Both of them holding his trophy. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Eli stared at the photo. He didn't hear the soft footsteps on the stairs, didn't notice Maddie watching from the doorway, didn't see her slip Clara's business card from the portfolio and quietly retreat upstairs with it. Rain began to fall outside, pattering against the windows. Eli sat motionless, the photograph trembling slightly in his hands, as memories washed over him like the storm beyond the walls. Each flash of lightning illuminated the kitchen in stark bursts, casting shadows that seemed to make the smiling figures in the photograph move and breathe again. He traced the edge of the photo with one calloused finger, remembering the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder that day, the pride in the Colonel's voice when he'd said, "That's my boy." When had that pride turned to disappointment? When had love become conditional on following orders? The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof. Upstairs, unknown to Eli, Maddie sat at her desk, carefully writing a response to Clara's card by lamplight. Her words were simple but certain. "He'll come. Give us time." The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees as Eli stood at his kitchen sink, methodically washing the morning's dishes. 2 days had passed since Clara's last visit, and the raw emotions from that conversation still churned in his gut. Maddie sat at the kitchen table, homework spread before her, occasionally glancing at her father with worried eyes. The knock came just after 6. 3 sharp raps that made Eli's shoulders tense. He dried, his hands slowly on a dish towel, trying to steady his breathing. "I'll get it," Maddie offered, but Eli shook his head. "No, honey. Stay put." He opened the door to find Clara standing there, her familiar kind smile doing little to soften the shock of who stood behind her. Colonel Raymond Turner, smaller than Eli remembered, more fragile, but still carrying himself with military bearing despite the wooden cane he leaned on. His silver hair was neatly combed, his clothes pressed and proper, but his face was deeply lined and pale. Eli's hands clenched at his sides. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Hello, son," the Colonel said softly. His voice trembled slightly, something Eli had never heard before. "You have no right to call me that." Eli started to close the door, but Clara stepped forward. "Please, Eli. Just 5 minutes." From behind him, Maddie's voice drifted over. "Dad? Who is it?" The colonel's eyes lit up at the sound of her voice, and something in Eli's chest twisted painfully. He stood frozen in the doorway, torn between slamming it shut and stepping aside. "This isn't about guilt," the colonel said, his grip tightening on his cane. "Though God knows I carry enough of that. He swallowed hard. "I just wanted to see my boy before I die." "Convenient timing," Eli bit out. 30 years of silence. "And now you show up with your money and your tricks? Daddy?" Maddie appeared at his elbow, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. "Is this?" The colonel's face softened as he looked at her. "You must be Maddie. You look just like your grandmother." Maddie stepped forward, extending her hand with a grace that made Eli's heart ache. "It's nice to meet you, sir. Would you like to stay for dinner?" "I made extra lasagna." "Maddie." Eli started to protest, but she turned those earnest eyes on him. "Please, Dad, just dinner?" Clara touched Eli's arm gently. "I'll leave you all to it," she said, already backing away. "Call me if you need anything." Eli found himself stepping aside, letting his father cross the threshold he'd sworn would stay closed forever. The colonel moved slowly, each step measured, and Eli noticed for the first time how thin his father's wrist was, where it gripped the cane. "The kitchen's this way," Maddie said, leading the way with the easy confidence of youth. "Do you like garlic bread?" They settled around the small kitchen table, the lasagna steaming between them. Maddie carried most of the conversation, filling the awkward silences with chatter about school and her piano lessons. "She's quite the musician," Eli found himself saying, surprising even himself. "Takes after her mother that way." The colonel nodded, pushing his food around his plate. "I heard about Sarah's passing." "I'm so sorry, son. I wanted to come to the funeral, but—" "But what?" Eli's fork clattered against his plate. "What stopped you? The same pride that kept you away when Mom died?" "Dad," Maddie whispered, her face falling. The colonel set down his fork carefully. "No, fear stopped me. Fear that I'd lost my right to be there. Fear that showing up would only hurt you more." He looked up, meeting Eli's eyes. "I've made so many mistakes, son. Too many to count. But not coming to see you, that was the worst of them all." Eli stared down at his plate, his throat tight. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. "Tell me about your work," the colonel said finally. "Clara mentioned you're a mechanic?" "Yeah." Eli cleared his throat. "At Jeb's Auto Repair. Been there about 8 years now." "He's the best mechanic in town," Maddie piped up proudly. "Everyone says so. You always did have a talent for fixing things," the colonel said quietly. "Even as a boy." The conversation limped along, careful and hesitant, like walking through a minefield. They talked about safe topics, the weather, the town's recent growth, Maddie's upcoming school play. But beneath every word lay 30 years of silence, of birthdays and Christmases and grief born alone. When the plates were cleared and the last of the awkward small talk exhausted, the colonel pushed himself to his feet. "I should go. Thank you for dinner, Maddie." "It was excellent," Maddie beamed. "You're welcome, Grandpa." The word hung in the air between them all. Eli walked his father to the door, watching as the older man carefully navigated the porch steps. "I won't push," the colonel said, turning back. "I know I haven't earned that right, but if you ever want to talk—" He left the sentence unfinished, hope and resignation warring in his tired eyes. Eli nodded stiffly, unable to form words. He watched as his father made his way slowly down the walkway to where a car waited at the curb. Only when the taillights had disappeared into the darkness did he close the door. "He's not who you remember, Daddy," Maddie whispered from behind him. The morning light filtered through Eli's bedroom window, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floor. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying last night's dinner over and over. As he shuffled toward the kitchen for his morning coffee, something white caught his eye, an envelope lying just inside the front door. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. The handwriting was precise, military-style block letters he remembered from childhood permission slips and report cards. He settled into his kitchen chair, the coffee forgotten, and began to read. "Dear Eli," the letter began. "Thank you for allowing me into your home last night. Seeing you and meeting my granddaughter meant more than I can express in words. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'd like to show you what I've been building. The Veterans Center on Oak Street, Turner's Hope, is nearly complete. If you're willing, I'll be there all day today. Eli folded the letter carefully, creasing it along precise lines. The morning silence felt heavy around him. Maddie appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the letter. "From your grandfather," Eli said, the words still strange on his tongue. "He wants me to see his Veterans Center." Maddie poured herself some cereal, watching him carefully. "Are you going to go?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I really don't know." At the auto shop, Eli couldn't focus. He changed oil in the wrong car and had to drain it all out again. After the third time he dropped a wrench, Jeb Collins called him into the office. "Something eating at you, son?" Jeb's gruff voice was gentler than usual. The older mechanic's coveralls were stained with decades of oil changes and brake jobs, but his eyes were sharp and kind. Eli slumped into the worn office chair. "My father wants me to see his Veterans Center." "The one they're building on Oak?" Jeb whistled. "Heard. That's going to be something special. Support services, counseling, job training, whole 9 yards. Yeah, well, he can throw money at whatever he wants. Doesn't change anything." Jeb leaned back, studying Eli. "You know what I think? Sometimes the hardest engine to fix is the one you're most afraid to look at. Might be worth seeing what he's built, even if you don't like the builder." The words stayed with Eli through lunch. By early afternoon, he found himself turning onto Oak Street, his truck's tires crunching on fresh gravel. The construction site sprawled before him, a large main building with 2 wings stretching out like welcoming arms. Workers moved purposefully, carrying lumber and equipment. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Colonel Raymond Turner. Despite the cane in his right hand, he maintained the straight-backed posture of a career soldier. He was directing a crew installing windows, his voice carrying clearly across the site. Eli sat in his truck for a long moment, watching. The colonel looked smaller than he remembered, more human somehow. Finally, he stepped out and walked toward the building. His father saw him immediately. Something flickered across the older man's face. Hope, perhaps, or relief. He waited for Eli to approach, letting his son set the pace of this careful dance. "Glad you came," the colonel said simply. Eli nodded, looking around. "Quite a project. Would you like to see inside?" They walked through the building slowly, mindful of the colonel's measured steps. The main hall was taking shape. High ceilings, warm wood tones, large windows letting in natural light. The colonel pointed out different areas: counseling offices, a job training center, meeting rooms for support groups. "This wing will be for families," he explained, gesturing to the right. "Children's play area, tutoring rooms, space for holiday gatherings. Many veterans lose touch with their families. We want to help rebuild those connections." Eli's throat tightened. "Why here?" he asked. "Why now?" The colonel paused, leaning slightly on his cane. "Because I understand now what I didn't then, that being a soldier isn't just about following orders. It's about coming home, about healing, about finding your way back to the people you love." He looked at Eli directly. "I failed at that part. Badly." They stood in silence, surrounded by the sounds of construction, hammers, saws, voices, calling back and forth. The afternoon sun slanted through empty window frames, painting golden rectangles on the unfinished floor. "We need help with logistics," the colonel said finally. "Supply coordination, contractor scheduling, that sort of thing. Your mechanical background would be valuable." Eli stared out one of the windows, watching workers unload lumber. He thought about Jeb's words about fixing engines, about Maddie's gentle insistence that people could change, about his own journey home from war, and how different it might have been with support like this. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Construction crews were packing up for the day, their shadows long against the sawdust-covered ground. "1 week," Eli said finally, his voice rough. "That's all. I'll help for 1 week." The colonel's face remained carefully neutral, but a small smile touched the corners of his mouth. 1 week, he agreed. Thank you, son. As they walked back toward their vehicles, the evening breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut wood and new beginnings. Neither man spoke of the walls between them, or of the tiny crack that had just appeared in their foundation. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the construction site, as Eli guided a forklift loaded with building supplies through the entrance of Turner's Hope. All around him, volunteers bustled about, some carrying boxes, others mounting drywall, and a few veterans huddled over blueprints near what would become the center's main office. "Hey, Turner, we need your expertise over here," called out Mike, a former Marine who'd been helping with the electrical work. Eli wiped his brow and made his way over, his work boots crunching on sawdust. The familiar smell of fresh lumber and paint reminded him of rebuilding schools in Iraq, though this time the work felt different. "Personal. The generator's acting up again," Mike explained, pointing to the hulking machine. Eli knelt beside it, his practiced hands finding the problem almost immediately. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice his father watching from across the room, leaning on his cane with an expression that mixed pride and hesitation. The sound of teenage laughter drew his attention. Maddie had arrived after school, carrying a stack of flyers she'd designed for the center's upcoming open house. She'd thrown herself into the project with characteristic enthusiasm, coordinating with local churches and schools to spread the word. Now she moved among the volunteers, offering water bottles and collecting signatures for her outreach database. "Your girl's got a writer's gift," Clara remarked, appearing beside Eli as he finished with the generator. "She's connected with 3 more veteran families just today." Her quiet presence had become a constant at the site, always watching, always encouraging, but never pushing. Eli nodded, unable to hide a small smile. "Gets that from her mother," he said softly. Sarah never met a stranger she couldn't turn into a friend. The afternoon wore on, and Eli found himself working alongside his father, installing support beams in what would become the family counseling room. The colonel's hands weren't as steady as they once were, but his eye for detail hadn't dimmed. "Remember that treehouse we built when you were 10? The colonel asked suddenly, holding a level against the beam. "You insisted on measuring everything 3 times. "Yeah," Eli replied, surprised by the memory. "Mom said we were both too stubborn for our own good." A chuckle escaped the colonel, followed by a slight cough. "She was right about that. Catherine always could see right through us both." The mention of his mother's name sent a familiar ache through Eli's chest, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Working together, they fell into a rhythm that felt almost natural. During their coffee break, Eli learned about other centers his father had helped establish in Virginia, Texas, even overseas. Each story revealed a side of the colonel he'd never known existed. "Why didn't you ever tell me about any of this?" Eli asked, gesturing at the half-finished building around them. The colonel's weathered face grew thoughtful. "Pride, I suppose." "Same reason you never told me about your Bronze Star." At Eli's startled look, he added, "Clara did her research well." More volunteers arrived as the afternoon progressed. Eli watched as his father greeted each one by name, knowing their stories, their struggles, their hopes. He saw how the older man's stern military bearing softened when talking to children of veterans, how he listened, with genuine interest to their dreams and fears. Maddie flitted between groups, her energy seemingly endless. She'd set up a small refreshment station and was serving coffee to tired workers, pausing to show the colonel her latest piano recital video on her phone. The sight of them together, his daughter and his father, stirred something deep in Eli's chest. "Your father's been funding programs like this for 15 years, Clara mentioned quietly as they sorted through supply invoices. "Started right after he retired. Every penny of his pension goes to veteran families." Eli absorbed this information silently, watching as the colonel shared a joke with 2 young veterans by the water cooler. Their laughter echoed through the unfinished space, genuine and warm. As evening approached, most volunteers began heading home. Eli finished securing tools in the storage area, his body aching but satisfied. The setting sun painted the windows in amber and gold, casting long shadows through the skeletal walls of what would soon be a place of healing. Making his final rounds, he paused at the entrance to the chapel area. The space was little more than framed walls and exposed beams. But somehow, it already felt sacred. Through the doorway, he could see his father's silhouette, kneeling at what would become the altar. The colonel's head was bowed, his lips moving in silent prayer, one hand gripping his cane while the other rested on the rough wooden frame. Eli stood frozen, words rising in his throat, about forgiveness, about time lost, about the man he was finally beginning to understand. But the moment felt too fragile to break. After a long pause, he turned and walked quietly away, leaving his father to his prayers in the gathering dusk. 2 days before the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Colonel Raymond Turner stood in the nearly finished community room of Turner's Hope, leaning on his cane as he watched volunteers hang the final decorations. His weathered face brightened when Eli walked in carrying a box of pamphlets. "Son," the colonel called out, his voice softer than his military bearing would suggest. "Got a minute?" Eli set down the box and walked over, noticing how his father's hand trembled slightly on the cane. "What do you need?" "I've been thinking about the ceremony." The colonel gestured to the podium being set up near the wall. "We need someone to give the main speech, someone who understands what this place truly means." Eli's shoulders tensed. Clara could do it, or one of the other veterans. "No." The colonel shook his head. "It needs to be you." "Me?" Eli let out a short laugh. "I'm not good with speeches. You're exactly who needs to speak." The colonel's eyes met his son's. "This whole project started because of your integrity. That $50,000 test, you're the only one in 3 towns who passed it. People need to hear what drove that choice." Eli walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where more volunteers were unloading chairs. "I just did what was right. Nothing special about that." "That's exactly what makes it special," the colonel's voice carried across the room. "In a world where everyone's looking for shortcuts, you chose the hard path, just like you always have." Silence stretched between them, filled with the echoes of old arguments and fresh understanding. Finally, Eli turned back. "What would I even say?" "Speak from your heart. About integrity. Second chances." The colonel's voice softened. "God knows we both know something about those." That evening, after Maddie had gone to bed, Eli sat at his kitchen table with a blank notepad. The house was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional scratch of his pen. He started and stopped dozens of times, crumpling paper after paper. His late wife's photo watched from the windowsill, her smile encouraging him as it had so many times before. She would have known exactly what to say. Sarah had always been better with words, better at expressing the heart behind actions. As midnight approached, memories flowed through Eli's mind. The weight of that envelope full of cash, his mother's face the day he enlisted, Maddie's tears when Sarah died, and now his father's trembling hands reaching across decades of silence. The words finally began to come. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and cool. Chairs filled quickly with townspeople, veterans, and families. News cameras set up in the back. Eli stood behind the podium, his handwritten pages laid carefully before him, and looked out at the sea of faces. His father sat in the front row, Maddie beside him. Clara stood near the back, nodding encouragement. Eli took a deep breath and began to speak. "When I found $50,000 in that parking lot, I had a choice to make." His voice started quiet, but grew stronger. "We had bills piling up, a foreclosure notice on the fridge. Every reason in the world to keep that money. But something my commanding officer once told me kept running through my head. What you do when no one's watching defines who you really are." The crowd grew still, listening. I learned that lesson twice in my life. First in the Army, where integrity meant the difference between life and death. And again as a father, trying to teach my daughter what really matters in this world. Eli's eyes met Maddie's, and he smiled slightly. "But what I'm learning now, what this center represents, is something even harder than doing right when no one's watching. It's about doing right when everyone is watching. When pride and old hurts tell you to walk away. When forgiveness seems impossible. In the front row, the colonel wiped his eyes quietly. Turner's Hope isn't just about helping veterans rebuild their lives. It's about rebuilding the things we thought were broken beyond repair. Trust, family, faith. It's about second chances, not just the ones we give others, but the ones we give ourselves. Eli's voice caught slightly, but he pressed. My father and I lost 30 years to pride and anger. But standing here today, I'm grateful for second chances. Grateful that doing what's right led me back to what matters most: family, community, and the courage to begin again. When Eli finished speaking, the silence held for a moment before erupting into applause. People stood, many wiping tears. The colonel remained seated, but his face showed everything words couldn't say. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in amber and gold, Eli and his father sat on the porch of Turner's Hope. 2 glasses of bourbon sat between them, barely touched. The sounds of the last volunteers leaving drifted through the autumn air. The colonel lifted his glass slightly. To new beginnings? Eli nodded, raising his own glass. To new beginnings. They sipped in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower. You know, the colonel said finally, your mother would have loved this. Seeing us here. Seeing what you've become. What we've become, Eli corrected gently. The colonel smiled, his eyes distant. Maybe this time we got it right. Eli nodded, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the building's new sign in golden light. Turner's Hope, where second chances begin. The morning sun had barely risen when Maddie's scream shattered the peaceful dawn. Eli bolted upright in bed, his heart racing as he heard her crying out from the guest room. Daddy, something's wrong with Grandpa! Eli sprinted down the hallway, his bare feet pounding against the wooden floors. The colonel lay motionless in the guest bed, his face ashen and still. Eli's military training kicked in as he checked for vital signs. There was a pulse, but it was weak and irregular. Call 911. He shouted to Maddie, who already had her phone in trembling hands. While they waited for the ambulance, Eli performed the basic first aid he'd learned in the Army. The colonel's breathing was shallow, his skin cold and clammy. Memories of battlefield, casualties flashed through Eli's mind as he monitored his father's condition, pushing away the rising panic. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficient movements filling the small room. They worked quickly, attaching monitors and starting an IV while asking rapid-fire questions about the colonel's medical history. Has he had heart problems before? One asked. Eli stood helplessly by the door. I don't know. The truth of those words hit him hard. There was so much he didn't know about his father anymore. At the hospital, fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Eli and Maddie waited in uncomfortable chairs. Clara arrived shortly after, her usually composed face lined with worry. The doctor finally emerged after what felt like hours. Colonel Turner has stabilized, she explained. He experienced a severe cardiac episode, but we've got him on medication now. He's resting. Relief flooded through Eli, followed immediately by confusion about why he felt so relieved. This man had been a stranger to him for decades. Why did it matter? Clara touched his arm gently. Eli, there's something you need to see. She reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope, slightly yellowed with age. We found this in the colonel's desk drawer at home. It's addressed to you. Eli stared at the envelope. His father's precise military handwriting spelled out, "My son," on the front. He took it but didn't open it, instead sliding it into his jacket pocket. He's asking for you, the doctor added softly. Eli shook his head. I can't. Not right now. He looked at Maddie. Stay with him? I need some air. The drive home was a blur. The envelope seemed to burn in his pocket, demanding attention. Once inside his empty house, Eli poured himself a finger of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table. The envelope lay before him like a live grenade, waiting to explode. Finally, with hands that weren't quite steady, he tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Eli, by the Fenera, time you read this, you'll likely know the truth I've been hiding. The doctors gave me 6 months to live. Cancer. Widespread and aggressive. I've refused treatment. An old soldier knows when it's time to make his final march. The money you found wasn't lost. I had Clara place it there, knowing your route to work, knowing your character. I needed to find you, son, but more than that, I needed to know if the boy I'd raised had become the man I'd failed to be. You proved yourself better than me in every way. Your integrity, your dedication to your daughter, your unwavering moral compass. These are the qualities I tried to instill, but never truly lived up to myself. The foundation, Turner's hope, all of it. They're not attempts to buy your forgiveness. They're my way of trying to leave something better behind than the mess I made of our family. Something worthy of the son I'm so proud of. Even if I lost the right to say so long ago, I know this revelation will anger you. You'll feel manipulated, and you have every right. I'm a coward for not telling you the truth from the start, but I needed to see you, to know you, to try to make amends before. Eli crumpled the letter in his fist, rage and pain burning through him like wildfire. He hurled his glass against the wall, watching it shatter into glittering shards. "Manipulative old bastard," he snarled into the empty room. "Couldn't just come clean, could you? Had to run your last mission, pull your last strings." He grabbed his keys and stormed out to his truck. The night air was cool against his face as he drove aimlessly through the sleeping town. Eventually, he found himself at the river overlook, a quiet spot where he used to take Maddie fishing when she was little. Eli killed the engine and sat in darkness, staring at the black water below. The moon's reflection rippled on the surface, broken and distorted like everything else in his life. The letter lay crumpled in his pocket, its words echoing in his head despite his attempts to silence them. The water seemed to mock him with its emptiness, reflecting back the hollow feeling that had taken root in his chest. He'd finally started to trust, to believe in something good, only to discover it was all built on another lie. The Colonel was dying, and even that truth had been hidden behind a carefully orchestrated plan. Eli sat motionless in his truck, watching the river flow endlessly into the darkness, carrying away everything except the weight in his heart. The river whispered in the darkness, its gentle sounds mixing with Eli's ragged breathing. His truck sat silent in the empty parking lot, headlights long since dimmed. In his trembling hands, the crumpled letter caught the faint starlight. His eyes, red and swollen, stared unseeing at the water. Memories crashed over him like waves. He was 18 again, standing ramrod straight in his newly pressed uniform, while his father's words cut deeper than any knife. "You're no son of mine," the Colonel had said, turning his back, the same back that was now bent with age and illness. Iraq flickered through his mind. The heat, the sand, the constant fear. But it was the quiet moments that haunted him most. Nights spent writing letters home to everyone except his father. His mother's funeral, where they'd stood on opposite sides of the grave, neither willing to break the silence. Sarah's face came to him then, clear as morning. His wife had always known what to say, even in her final days. "Grudges are too heavy to carry forever, honey," she'd told him. Her voice weak, but her eyes bright with love. "Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is lay down his weapons." The eastern sky began to lighten, though dawn was still hours away. Eli's hands clenched around the steering wheel. All those years of anger, of hurt, pride, and for what? His father was dying, and instead of facing it like a man, he was hiding by a river like a scared kid. The drive home seemed both endless and too short. His headlights caught Maddie's figure on the porch before he'd even turned into the driveway. She was in her pajamas, arms wrapped tight around herself, looking so much like her mother it made his chest ache. "Dad?" Her voice quavered as he climbed out of the truck. "I was so worried. You weren't answering your phone, and after Grandpa at the hospital." She trailed off, lower lip trembling. Eli crossed the yard in long strides and gathered her into his arms. She felt so small against him, yet somehow, she was the stronger one right now. "I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry." They moved inside, where the kitchen light cast warm shadows. Maddie made coffee, while Eli slumped at the table, the letter lying between them like a live wire. He's dying, Eli said finally, his voice rough. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. That's what the letter says. He's known for months. He ran a hand over his face. The money, the foundation, all of it. It was just his way of finding me before. Before it's too late, Maddie finished softly. He manipulated me again, Eli said. But the anger felt hollow now. Just like when I was a kid. Always pulling strings. Always having to be in control. Maddie was quiet for a long moment, stirring her tea thoughtfully. When she spoke, her words held an echo of Sarah's gentle wisdom. Maybe Grandpa wasn't buying forgiveness, she said carefully. Maybe he was giving you a way to find yours. The words hit Eli like a physical blow. He stared at his daughter, seeing suddenly how grace could pass through generations, how love could heal old wounds if only given the chance. Something broke inside him then, a dam he'd built decades ago. Tears came, hot and unexpected, and this time he didn't fight them. Maddie moved around the table and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, holding him as he'd held her through so many storms. I've been so angry for so long, he whispered into her hair. I don't know how to stop. By choosing not to be, she said simply. Like you taught me about kindness, it's a choice we make every day. They sat together as the kitchen grew lighter, the first pale fingers of dawn reaching through the windows. Eli wiped his eyes and looked toward the horizon, something quiet and certain settling in his chest. The weight of 30 years of anger began to lift, replaced by a different kind of burden. The urgent need to make things right, while there was still time. Through the window, the sky turned pearl gray, then pink, promising a new day. In Eli's eyes, a decision formed, clear and unwavering, as the coming dawn. Morning sunlight pierced through the autumn fog as Eli's truck wound its way through the quiet streets of Willow Creek. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and beside him on the passenger seat lay a small wooden frame, its glass reflecting glints of gold from the rising sun. Inside was a photograph he hadn't looked at in years, his mother and father at a military ball, both young and smiling, his father's uniform crisp and proud. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty this early. Eli sat in his truck for several long minutes, his calloused fingers tracing the edge of the picture frame. The faces in the photo seemed to watch him, his mother's gentle smile, his father's strong stance. He remembered taking this photo down from the wall the day he'd enlisted, the day everything fell apart. Walking through the sterile hospital corridors, Eli's boots echoed against the linoleum floors. The smell of antiseptic and coffee from the nurse's station brought back memories of Sarah's final days. His late wife's quiet courage as cancer took her. Now here he was again, watching another parent slip away. Outside room 412, Clara sat reading. She looked up as he approached, her eyes tired but kind. He's awake, she said softly. He's been asking for you. Eli nodded, clutching the photo frame tighter. How is he? Stable, but weak. The doctors say. She trailed off, but her expression said enough. Taking a deep breath, Eli pushed open the door. The colonel lay propped up in bed, looking smaller somehow against the white sheets. Medical equipment beeped steadily around him, IV lines snaking from his arms. But his eyes, those steel-gray eyes that had once commanded troops, were clear and alert as they fixed on his son. Eli, the colonel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sir. The formal address slipped out automatically, and Eli saw his father wince slightly. Still, sir, after all these years? Eli moved closer to the bed, pulling up a chair. Old habits. He paused, then set the framed photo on the bedside table where his father could see it. Found this at the house. The colonel's weathered hand reached out, trembling slightly as he touched the glass. Your mother's favorite dress, he said softly. She wore it to every formal event, said it brought her luck. His voice caught. I was so proud that night, standing next to her. Just like I was proud every time you wore your uniform, even though I couldn't say it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of silence. Eli felt something crack inside his chest. Why? He asked. The question that had haunted him for 30 years. Why did you cut me off when I enlisted? I thought you'd be proud. The colonel's eyes grew distant. Because I knew what war does to good men. I'd seen too many sons come home in boxes. Too many fathers having to bury their children. His fingers tightened on the blanket. I thought if I forbade it, you'd stay safe. When you went anyway. My pride. My damned pride wouldn't let me admit I was just scared. You were trying to protect me, Eli said slowly, understanding dawning like the morning light outside. And I lost you anyway. The colonel's voice cracked. Missed your graduations, your wedding, the birth of my granddaughter. Missed saying goodbye to your mother. Tears slid down his weathered cheeks. I was so sure I was right. So certain my way was the only way. By the time I realized what it cost me, the wall between us was too high to climb. Eli leaned forward, taking his father's frail hand. It felt like holding a bird's wing, delicate and trembling. So you set up the test, with the money, to find me. To prove to myself, you'd become the man I always knew you could be. Better than me. The colonel's grip tightened slightly. When Clara told me how you turned in that money without hesitation, I knew. You learned the lesson I forgot, that integrity matters more than pride. Something wet splashed onto their clasped hands, and Eli realized he was crying too. I wanted to hate you, he admitted. All these years I told myself I did. But hate is just love turned inside out. His father finished quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun painting warm squares on the hospital floor. Then Eli spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I forgive you, Dad. The colonel's breath caught and his eyes filled again. I don't deserve it. Maybe that's what makes it forgiveness, Eli said, remembering Maddie's words about grace. His father's other hand fumbled for something on the bedside table, a small silver cross on a chain. Would you pray with me, son? Like we used to? Eli nodded, unable to speak. He took the cross, wrapped both their hands around it, and bowed his head. The words came slowly at first, then faster. Prayers for peace, for healing, for the years they'd lost and the time they had left. When he finished, he looked up to find his father watching him with a mix of love and pride that made his chest ache. The veteran center, Eli said firmly. I'll finish what you started. I'll make sure it helps people find their way home, just like we did. The colonel's lined face softened into a smile. His voice was barely a whisper as he said, Then my mission's complete. The morning was cold, and still when Clara's call came. Eli had been up already, fixing coffee in his kitchen, when his phone buzzed on the counter. Something in her voice, gentle, yet heavy with meaning, told him everything before she spoke the words. He went peacefully, Eli, in his sleep. The mug trembled in his hand. He set it down carefully, watching the dark liquid ripple. When? About an hour ago. The nurse found him. Clara paused. He looked. At peace. Eli closed his eyes, feeling the weight of finality settle over him. All those years of anger, the recent weeks of tentative reconciliation, and now, this quiet ending. I'll be there soon. The hospital corridor seemed longer than before. Eli's footsteps echoed against the linoleum as he made his way to his father's room. Inside, the morning light cast long shadows across the empty bed, already stripped of its sheets. A small box of personal items sat on the bedside table. The colonel's watch, his reading glasses, the photo of Eli's mother he always kept close. Later that morning, as news spread through Willow Creek, the town responded with the quiet dignity of a community that understood loss. At Turner's Hope, someone lowered the flag to half-mast. Veterans who'd never met the colonel stood in respectful silence as they passed. The local paper ran a front-page story about his service, both in uniform and after. Maddie helped Eli sort through the colonel's belongings in his small apartment. They found medals in velvet boxes, old military maps, and dozens of letters from families the colonel had helped through his foundation work. Each discovery was like uncovering another piece of the man Eli had never fully known. Look at this, Maddie said softly, holding up a shoebox filled with newspaper clippings. Every article about Eli's military service, his mechanical work, even the story about finding the $50,000, all carefully preserved. He was watching over you, Dad, all those years. The funeral was set for Saturday. The autumn air was crisp and clear as people gathered at First Baptist Church. Veterans in dress uniforms stood alongside mechanics in clean work shirts. Clara had helped arrange everything with military precision, just as the colonel would have wanted. Eli stood at the pulpit, his father's letter heavy in his pocket. The faces before him blurred slightly as he began to speak. "My father was a complicated man," he started, his voice steady, despite the ache in his throat. "He lived by a code that sometimes seemed harsh to others, but what I've learned, what he taught me in these final weeks, is that even the strongest code must bend for love." He shared stories then, about the young lieutenant who'd earned a Silver Star in Vietnam, about the colonel who dedicated his retirement to helping veterans rebuild their lives, and finally, about the father who'd spent his last days trying to rebuild a bridge to his son. "Many of you know, I found an envelope of money a few weeks ago." Eli continued, his voice growing thick. "What you don't know is that it was my father's last tactical mission." A few sad chuckles rippled through the crowd. He was always a strategist, planning 3 moves ahead. But this time, his objective wasn't military. It was mercy. Eli pulled out the letter, unfolding it carefully. The paper was soft from being read and reread over the past days. He cleared his throat and began to read. "My son, if you're reading this, I've finally run out of time to make things right. The money was a test, yes, but not of your character. I never doubted that. It was a test of my own courage, to see if I could finally face the man you've become without me. When you returned every dollar, it proved what I'd always known. You grew into a better man than I ever was." Eli paused, gathering himself. In the front pew, Maddie reached for his hand, and he gripped it tightly before continuing. "The center isn't just my legacy. It's yours. A place where broken soldiers can learn what took me a lifetime to understand. That true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising again, in forgiving, in loving despite the scars." The letter trembled in his hands. Throughout the church, veterans sat straighter, many wiping their eyes. These were men who understood about scars, about pride, about the long road home. At the cemetery, the honor guard stood at attention. The autumn wind carried the sharp report of rifles, firing their salute. As the bugler began to play taps, Eli rose slowly from his seat. His back was straight, his chin high. A soldier's bearing his father would have recognized. The mournful notes echoed across the graves as Eli raised his hand in a final salute. Tears rolled freely down his cheeks, but he held the position steady. In that moment, he was both the angry young man who'd walked away and the son who'd found his way back. Both the soldier following his last orders and the father showing his daughter what grace looked like. The bugler's last note faded into silence. Eli held his salute a moment longer, honoring not just the colonel who died, but the father he'd finally found in those precious final days. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees surrounding Turner's Hope as Eli unlocked the front doors 1 week after his father's funeral. Golden morning light streamed through the windows, casting warm shadows across the newly polished floors. His footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway as he made his way to his makeshift office. Before he could settle in, a knock on the doorframe caught his attention. Jim Barrett, a Vietnam veteran he'd met during construction, stood there with his weathered cap in his hands. "Morning, Eli," Jim said softly. "Just wanted to stop by and say, well, we're all mighty grateful you're keeping this place going." "Your dad would be proud." Eli's throat tightened. "Thanks, Jim. Come on in and have some coffee." Throughout the morning, more veterans dropped by. Some brought coffee and donuts, others just wanted to talk. Each one expressed their gratitude, sharing stories about how the colonel had helped them or their families. With each visitor, The weight of loss in Eli's chest began to transform into something lighter. Purpose. Around noon, Maddie arrived with her school backpack and a box of art supplies. She'd been spending every afternoon at the center since the funeral, determined to make it feel more welcoming. Today, she was working on a mural in the community room, a sunrise breaking through clouds, done in soft yellows and blues. "Looking good, sweetheart," Eli said, watching her carefully outline another cloud. "Thanks, Dad." She dipped her brush in paint. "I thought maybe we could put Grandpa's favorite Bible verse underneath when it's done." Eli smiled, remembering how the Colonel would quote scripture during their recent conversations. He'd like that. Around 2 o'clock, Clara arrived carrying a leather portfolio. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached Eli's desk. "Got a minute?" she asked, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Of course." He gestured to a chair. Clara sat down and opened the portfolio, pulling out several official-looking documents. "These need your signature," she said, sliding them across the desk. "They transfer full ownership of Turner's Hope to you, along with the director position." Eli stared at the papers, his hands frozen mid-reach. "What?" "It was all arranged before." Clara paused delicately. "Well, before." The Colonel was very clear about his wishes. "The Foundation will continue its support, but this place is yours now, Eli. Your father wanted you to have a legacy worth passing on." With trembling fingers, Eli picked up the deed. There it was in black and white. His name, listed as owner and director of Turner's Hope Veterans Center. The same amount as that envelope he'd found, $50,000, was listed as annual operational support from the Balland Foundation. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. Clara smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're already making a difference." After signing the papers, Eli walked through the building, seeing it with new eyes. This was his now, not just to run, but to shape into something that could help others find their way back to hope, just as he had. He stopped at the chapel doors. The small space had been his father's favorite spot, where he'd often found the Colonel praying in his final days. Taking a deep breath, Eli stepped inside. The afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows, creating patches of colored light on the floor. A simple wooden cross hung on the far wall, flanked by 2 empty spaces that had been waiting for something special. "Dad?" Maddie appeared beside him, paint smudged on her cheek. "I was thinking maybe we could put pictures here?" She pointed to the empty spaces. "One of Grandpa and one of Mom?" Eli wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That's perfect, honey. A place to remember them both." They worked together, carefully hanging the photographs they'd chosen. On the left, a picture of the Colonel in his dress uniform, young and proud. On the right, a photo of Eli's wife, Sarah, taken at the beach a year before she passed, her smile radiant and full of life. Standing back, Eli felt tears prick his eyes. Here were the 2 great losses of his life, transformed into something beautiful. The chapel would be a place where others could find the same healing he had discovered, a reminder that broken things could be made whole again. As the day drew to a close, Eli walked Maddie to her car. "You sure you don't want me to stay and help clean up?" she asked. "No, you've got homework to do. I'll see you tomorrow." After she drove away, Eli made his final rounds, turning off lights and checking doors. He paused at the main entrance, looking up at the sign that now belonged to him, Turner's Hope, in simple, dignified letters. A smile tugged at his lips as he remembered that envelope of cash, lying in the parking lot like a test. Or maybe it had been more like a seed planted by a father who knew his son's heart better than he'd thought. "Guess the money did find me after all," he whispered, turning the key in the lock. Spring painted Willow Creek in vibrant colors, transforming the grounds of Turner's Hope into a canvas of pink dogwood blossoms and yellow daffodils. Children laughed as they chased each other across the freshly cut grass, while their parents, many of them veterans, gathered on benches nearby, sharing stories and coffee from the center's small cafe. Eli stood at his office window, watching the scene below with quiet satisfaction. The center had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. Where empty rooms once echoed with possibility, now life flourished. Support groups met daily. Families found healing, and hope spread like the spring flowers dotting the landscape. "Dad!" Maddie's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She burst into his office, her teen energy filling the room. "The decorating committee needs help hanging the banner for tonight's fundraiser." He smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. At 15, she'd become the heart of Turner's Hope, organizing youth programs and brightening the halls with her artwork. "Tell them I'll be right there." Outside, volunteers scurried about, transforming the community hall into an elegant venue for the evening's anniversary celebration. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the entrance, and round tables dotted the lawn, each centered with fresh flower arrangements donated by local florists. Clara Jameson, still serving as the foundation's advisor, directed the setup with her characteristic grace. "Eli," she called, waving him over. "Channel 5 wants to do a live segment during the fundraiser. They're fascinated by how much we've accomplished in just a few months." Eli rubbed the back of his neck, still uncomfortable with attention. "The story isn't about me, Clara. It's about everyone who helped make this place what it is. That's exactly why they want to talk to you," she replied with a knowing smile. "You've never lost sight of what matters." As evening approached, cars filled the parking lot. Families of veterans, town officials, and supporters from neighboring communities arrived in their Sunday best. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and purpose. Mayor Thompson took the podium first, praising how Turner's Hope had transformed their community. "What started as one man's act of integrity has become a beacon of light for our entire region," she announced proudly. When it was Eli's turn to speak, he stood at the microphone, his hands steady on the worn index cards. The faces before him reminded him of how far they'd all come. Josh Martinez, who'd found work through their job training program. Sarah Williams, whose children now had a safe place while she attended counseling. Young Tommy Baker, who'd finally smiled again after losing his dad in Afghanistan. "A wise girl once told me that sometimes the greatest act of courage is choosing compassion over pride," Eli began, catching Maddie's eye in the crowd. "I didn't understand then what I know now, that healing happens when we stop fighting our past and start building our future." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Turner's Hope isn't just about helping veterans. It's about remembering that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Every person here tonight has chosen to believe in second chances, in the power of forgiveness, in the strength of community." The crowd listened intently as he shared stories of lives changed and families reunited. He spoke of midnight calls from veterans in crisis who found hope in knowing they weren't alone, of children who'd rediscovered joy in the center's programs, of wounds slowly healing through understanding and acceptance. A reporter from the Washington Post sat in the front row, scribbling notes furiously. She'd arrived that morning, drawn by rumors of a small-town veterans center that was redefining community support. Her presence suggested their story might soon reach others who needed to hear it. After the speeches, as music filled the air and people mingled over dinner, Eli found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Veterans clasped his hand, sharing quiet words of gratitude. Parents introduced children who'd benefited from the center's programs. Each interaction reminded him of the ripple effect of simple choices made with integrity. The evening wound down as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Cleanup crews worked efficiently, their tasks lightened by shared purpose and friendship. Eli watched it all with a full heart, remembering the bitter man he'd been just months ago. "Ready for our walk?" Maddie appeared at his side, linking her arm through his. It had become their tradition, these quiet evening strolls by the river after special events at the center. They walked in comfortable silence along the familiar path. The same river that had once witnessed his darkest moment now reflected the peace he'd found. Water flowed gentle and steady, carrying spring petals downstream. "You know what I love most about the center?" Maddie said softly, pausing to skip a stone across the water's surface. "What's that?" "How it shows that good things can come from hard times. Like those flowers that grow through sidewalk cracks. They're stronger because they had to fight their way through." Eli squeezed her shoulder, marveling at her wisdom. They stood together watching the river flow, its quiet strength a reminder of life's constant renewal. The evening air carried the scent of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass, while distant laughter from the center drifted on the breeze. This spot, once heavy with despair, now felt different. The weight of old grief had lifted, replaced by something lighter, not just peace, but possibility. Here, where he'd once questioned everything, Eli found himself filled with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The morning air held the crisp sweetness of early spring. Eli Turner sat on the wooden porch steps of his home, watching the sun paint the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. Beside him, Maddie cradled a steaming mug of hot cocoa between her hands, her dark hair catching glints of the dawn light. "You're up early," Eli said, glancing at his daughter with a smile. "Couldn't sleep," Maddie replied, blowing across the surface of her drink, too excited about the acceptance letter from State. Eli's chest swelled with pride. Just yesterday, they'd opened the thick envelope together, both of them trying not to cry as they read the scholarship offer. "Your mom would have been so proud," he said softly. "She always knew you'd do great things." "I was thinking about Grandpa, too," Maddie said, her voice quiet. "How he never got to see this." Eli nodded, remembering the way his father's eyes had lit up whenever Maddie played piano at the center. He saw enough to know what kind of person you'd become. That was his gift, seeing the good in people before they saw it in themselves. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across their small front yard. The morning dew sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds. "You know what's funny, Dad?" Maddie took another sip of cocoa. "When I was little, I used to pray every night for God to fix our family. I didn't understand why he took so long to answer." Eli chuckled, but his eyes grew misty. "Sometimes the longest roads lead to the best destinations. I was so caught up in my anger, I couldn't see the blessing waiting on the other side. Like finding that money?" Maddie grinned. "Like finding myself," Eli corrected. "The money was just God's way of getting my attention." A car pulled into their driveway, Clara's silver sedan. She stepped out wearing a bright spring dress, her familiar warm smile greeting them as she approached. "I hoped I'd catch you both," she said, climbing the porch steps. "I wanted to say goodbye properly." Maddie set down her mug. "You're really leaving?" Clara nodded, settling onto the porch swing. "The foundation's starting a new project in Arizona. Veterans' families out there need help too. Won't be the same without you," Eli said, meaning it. Clara had become more than just a colleague. She was family. "Oh, I think Turner's hope is in excellent hands." Clara's eyes crinkled with affection. "You know, when I first placed that envelope in the parking lot, I thought I was testing someone's honesty. Instead, I witnessed something far more precious. Grace in action. I was just doing what was right." Eli shrugged. "That's exactly what grace is, Eli," Clara said. "Doing what's right even when it costs you everything. Your father understood that at the end. So did you." Maddie leaned against her father's shoulder. "Will you visit?" "Try to keep me away," Clara laughed. "I expect regular updates about college life, young lady." The morning breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Eli's gaze drifted to the small table beside the porch swing, where a framed photograph stood. In it, his father sat in his military dress uniform, pride and dignity evident in his bearing. But it was the gentle smile that Eli remembered most now, the same smile he'd worn in his final days. Eli touched the frame lightly. For so many years, this photo had been hidden away, too painful to look at. Now it brought comfort, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal. "You know what your father told me before he passed?" Clara asked softly. "He said finding you wasn't about clearing his conscience. It was about giving you back your inheritance." "The center?" Eli asked. Clara shook her head. "Faith. The belief that doing right matters, even when it hurts, even when no one's watching. That's the real legacy he wanted to pass on." They sat together as the morning grew warmer, sharing memories and dreams, until Clara had to leave. There were hugs, promises to stay in touch, and a few tears that no one tried to hide. Later that morning, Eli stood outside Turner's Hope, watching veterans and their families arrive for the day's activities. Children's laughter drifted from the playground they'd built last summer. Inside, a therapy group was starting, offering healing to those still carrying war's invisible scars. The American flag rippled proudly above the entrance, its shadow dancing across the words, "Turner's Hope," carved in stone. Eli remembered his father's words from the letter. A man's true worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he gives away. Looking at the life flourishing around him, the families rebuilt, the hearts mended, the hope restored, Eli felt profound peace settle in his soul. "Honor found me when I wasn't looking for it," he whispered to the morning air. The sun climbed higher, bathing the center in warm light. In that moment, Eli Turner understood that some treasures couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. They were counted in transformed lives, renewed faith, and love that bridged even the widest gaps. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.